Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Palm Sunday morning, March 27th, 1836. The men were told they were going outside to gather firewood. Most of them believed it. They had surrendered a week earlier after a desperate fight on the open prairie, and a Mexican general had given them reason to think they'd be paroled, sent home across the border. So when soldiers came to the fort at first light and marched them out in 3 columns along 3 separate roads, many of the men went quietly, confused by the armed escort maybe. But they'd been waiting 8 days in that fort, and any movement felt like progress toward going home. They were told to turn away from the soldiers. What happened next lasted about 10 minutes. This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, and today we're looking at an event that's been quietly forgotten by popular history, even though it killed more Americans than the Alamo, happened just 3 weeks later and is bound up in the same revolution. The Goliad Massacre, March 27th, 1836. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. We can't even agree on what to call it. Scholars, community leaders, and descendants still argue today about whether it was a massacre, an execution, or something in between. That argument tells you everything you need to know about why this event matters. Understanding Goliad requires holding at least 3 things true at once: that approximately 425 men were murdered in cold blood while they were prisoners of war, that the man who ordered their deaths was operating entirely within Mexican law, and that the revolution those men died for was fighting to establish a republic that would protect the very institution, slavery, that Mexico had been trying to abolish. All 3 of those things are true, and all 3 have been inconvenient for different reasons, which is why the story keeps getting simplified. The men Colonel James Fannin commanded were not soldiers in any traditional sense. Most of them were volunteers, farmers, lawyers, drifters, idealists who had come to Texas from Georgia and Alabama and New York looking for land, for adventure, or both. Fannin himself was a West Point man who had dropped out, a struggling planner with grand ambitions and a reputation for hesitation at critical moments. By early March 1836, Fannin and roughly 400 men were garrisoned at an old Spanish fort in Goliad that Fannin had renamed Fort Defiance, which tells you something about his state of mind. General Sam Houston had ordered him to abandon Goliad and fall back. Fannin delayed. He had sent most of his horses and wagons away, and he kept finding reasons not to move. When he finally retreated, it was too late. A Mexican force under General José de Urrea, one of Santa Anna's most capable commanders, had moved up the coast and caught Fannin's men in the open prairie near Colado Creek. The Texians fought for 2 days. When Mexican reinforcements arrived and made the outcome certain, Fannin's men voted, not to fight to the death, to surrender. There was a reason they expected to live. Urrea had a reputation for handling prisoners humanely. He wanted to handle these ones the same way. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna had proclaimed himself the supreme authority of Mexico in 1835 after abolishing the Federalist Constitution of 1824. His consolidation of power triggered rebellions across the country, not just in Texas, but in Oaxaca, Zacatecas, and other Mexican states. He crushed them. When Texian colonists rose up, he treated their rebellion the same way, as treason by foreign-born settlers who had accepted Mexican land grants, Mexican citizenship, and Mexican law, and then decided those obligations didn't apply to them. In December 1835, Santa Anna issued a formal decree. Any foreigner caught bearing arms against Mexico on Mexican soil would be treated as a pirate, an outlaw beyond the protection of the law, and executed. This was not a battlefield whim. This was his stated policy, announced months before Goliad, available to any Texian commander who cared to learn what it said. Fannin knew about it, or should have. When his men voted to surrender, some believed they were surrendering as prisoners of war with rights under international law. Others clearly understood that Santa Anna's decree put them in serious jeopardy. Urrea accepted the surrender. He wrote to Santa Anna personally requesting clemency for the captured men. And then he left Goliad, turning command over to a subordinate officer named Colonel José Nicolás de la Portilla. My sense is Urrea knew exactly what he was doing when he left. The evening before the executions, March 26th, Portilla received Santa Anna's execution order in triplicate: shoot the prisoners as pirates. Within hours, Urrea's separate message arrived: treat the prisoners with consideration and put them to work rebuilding the town. Portilla spent an unquiet night weighing those two commands. He was a colonel. Santa Anna was the president and commander-in-chief of the Mexican army. He concluded, not unreasonably by military logic, that he was bound to obey his supreme commander over a field general's request for clemency. He was not a cruel man executing a personal vendetta. He was a man caught between two orders, making a decision that military hierarchy made almost inevitable. The comparison to "I was just following orders" is unavoidable, and it's worth sitting with carefully. Because Portilla's situation was genuinely different from the post-World War II cases that phrase evokes, Santa Anna's decree had been public law for 3 months. He wasn't being asked to violate a legal standard his training required him to recognize. He was being asked to enforce an announced policy of his own government. And now, the truth that almost never makes it into the popular version of this story. The men who died at Goliad were fighting to establish the Republic of Texas. The Republic of Texas, when it was founded months later, wrote the protection of slavery directly into its constitution, making it illegal to emancipate enslaved people without explicit government approval. Mexico had formally abolished slavery in 1829. One of the deep, underlying tensions driving the Texas Revolution was Mexico's increasing pressure on Anglo colonists to actually comply with that abolition. Those colonists were determined to resist it. So we have a situation where men were executed under Mexican law, fighting for a republic that would entrench human bondage. The cry of "Remember Goliad" that galvanized Texas independence was deployed in service of a cause that was, in part, a defense of slavery. And the full picture makes it impossible to tell this as a simple story of heroic martyrs against tyrannical oppressors. Both things are true. All three are true. What keeps drawing me back to Goliad is the people who refuse to fit the simple version of this story. Urrea is one. He was a gifted general. His campaign up the Texas coast was textbook military work. He genuinely tried to save Fannin's men. He wrote to Santa Anna requesting clemency. He issued Portilla a countermanding order for humane treatment. And then he departed, knowing full well that Portilla had Santa Anna's execution order, and knowing that his own instruction was militarily subordinate to it. He preserved his conscience by making sure he wasn't in the room. History has been kinder to him than he perhaps deserves. Then there's Francita Alaves, the woman history calls the Angel of Goliad. She was the companion of a Mexican colonel, not a Texian sympathizer. She had no obvious reason to intervene, but in the days surrounding the massacre, she used whatever personal influence she had over her companion and other officers to pull individual men from the execution line. About 20 survived because of her. We don't know everything about her motives. We do know she risked something real to act when every institutional pressure around her said to stay silent. And then there's Fannin himself, executed last. Before they shot him, he made 3 requests: that he be shot in the chest rather than the face, that he be given a proper Christian burial, and that his personal belongings be sent to his family. All 3 requests were ignored. He was shot in the face. His body was burned with the others and left in the open for months. I find myself thinking about Portilla on the night of March 26th, sitting with those 2 orders, and about Urrea, riding away knowing what he'd left behind, and about Alalavez, who looked at the same situation as everyone around her and made a different calculation entirely. A Texas monthly investigation found that community leaders in Goliad were actively fighting over whether to use the word massacre at all. A Texas Parks and Wildlife Planning report from 1999 put the word massacre in quotation marks throughout its pages. Historian Andres Tijerina argued that the way Goliad gets commemorated continues to reinforce a racially divided modern Texas society, what he called a comic book history, in which the Anglo is always the hero, and the Mexican is always a debased tyrant. He's not alone in that view. That argument is about more than language. It's about whose suffering counts as a massacre and whose counts as a legal execution. It's about what a founding story is allowed to include and what it quietly sets aside. The question of how we name historical atrocities shapes what we're allowed to feel about the people who ordered them, and by extension, about the institutions those people built. That's not a 19th century question. It lives in every debate about historical monuments, every fight over what gets taught in school, every argument about what language a state historical marker is permitted to use. The unresolved question at Goliad is the same unresolved question in 100 American cities right now. The Spanish philosopher George Santayana wrote that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It's a fine observation, but I think it misses something. The harder problem isn't remembering. It's agreeing on what the past actually was. Goliad has been remembered continuously since 1836. It became a war cry. It has monuments and reenactments and historical commissions. The problem isn't that it was forgotten. The problem is that what gets remembered has been carefully edited, the heroism preserved, the context removed, the slavery question quietly set aside. The way I see this, the real lesson of Goliad isn't about Mexican tyranny or Texian bravery. It's about what happens when a society builds its founding story on a partial truth. The partial truth holds for a while, but the parts that were left out don't disappear. They accumulate. They keep surfacing in arguments about what words to put on historical markers, in debates about whose version of the story gets told in schools. They come back not as history, but as the kind of unresolved conflict that quietly shapes the present. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, here are a few things worth sitting with. Did the men at Goliad die as martyrs for freedom, or as men who surrendered their lives in service of a cause that included human bondage? Was Santa Anna a tyrant who violated the rules of war, or a head of state enforcing a policy he had announced publicly 6 months before? And when a society argues for nearly 2 centuries over what to call an event, massacre or execution, what does that tell us? Not just about the event, but about the society still doing the arguing. Because that's what Goliad teaches us. Not just about the Texas Revolution, but about the harder question of what we owe to the full truth of our own history, even when that truth is uncomfortable, even when it complicates the founding stories we've built ourselves around. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, please tell a friend. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.